The United States has announced that it has carried out a new strike on a boat off the coast of Venezuela, the fourth in recent weeks. This one comes after President Donald Trump declared that the U.S. is at war with drug cartels. He made the designation in a notice sent to Congress on Wednesday, which has been seen by multiple media outlets. Now, it says the president determined these cartels are non-state armed groups, designated them as terrorist organizations, and determined that their actions constitute an attack against the United States. Last month, the U.S. said it carried out 3 deadly military strikes on boats in the Caribbean, in international waters near Venezuela. It alleges that they were smuggling drugs. The U.S. has also built up its naval forces in the area and dispatched 10 F-35 aircraft to Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory. It's the biggest military deployment in the Caribbean in decades. The strikes have raised questions about whether the U.S. military is legally entitled to kill alleged cartel members under domestic and international law. By declaring the U.S. is involved in an armed conflict with the cartels, the Trump administration aims to provide a legal rationale for its actions. The attacks have also increased tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela. Venezuela's left-wing authoritarian president, Nicolas Maduro, has accused Trump of a covert bid to oust him. The Trump administration accuses Maduro of being a narco-terrorist and a drug cartel leader and is offering a $50 million bounty for his arrest. And to find out what exactly is going on here, I'm joined now by Christopher Sabatini. He's a senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. That's an international affairs think tank based in London. Mr. Sabatini, it's good to have you with us. President Trump says that the U.S. is at war with drug cartels. I'm wondering first, what's the point of this notice to Congress, in your opinion?
Well, frankly, this is an attempt to cover their argument. They're trying to demonstrate that this is a war that legitimates, in their view, attacking civilians without due process, that in which they are the equivalent of combatants in a war zone. Questions have been raised across the aisle by both Republicans and Democrats that by declaring this war on narco-terrorists, is the term they like to use, it is in violation of the War Powers Act, and that it is even in violation of international norms because they're killing civilians without due process, without them actually being armed threats. So he's trying to draw this, I think it's a very loose and tenuous connection between drugs and armed combatants, which, quite frankly, a number of U.S. senators, again, on both sides of the aisle, are not quite buying.
You know, at the center of this U.S. war on drug cartels is Venezuela and its president, Nicolas Maduro. Can you tell us what role do they play in international drug trafficking?
They're large international drug traffickers as a country. They're not producers, and they're not producers at all of fentanyl. Fentanyl, when it crosses the border in the U.S., comes from Mexico, oftentimes from Chinese precursors, materials. But in the case of Venezuela, what they are is they are a transshipment point for cocaine that's leaving Colombia. But they really only, the cocaine that leaves Venezuela, most of it's actually bound for Europe. Only about 5% of the cocaine consumed in the United States comes across Venezuelan airspace or maritime space. Most of the cocaine that enters the United States comes from the Pacific or up through the Isthmus of Central America and through Mexico. So this is really an attempt to try to engage in another agenda that the Trump administration has, which is to try to engage in regime change, to take out the Nicolas Maduro government. They've named Nicolas Maduro and a number of his associates in the government as being members of the cartels de los soles, which is, they're claiming is a narco-terrorist organization. And they're claiming that that gives them the license to effectively take them out. By the same token, they've also doubled the bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head to $50 million. So if you happen to have any information to be able to turn him over to U.S. authorities, you can make yourself a quick $50 million. That, by the way, is more than the U.S. placed on the head of Osama bin Laden. And it demonstrates just a general trend across this entire rhetoric and policy, which is hyperbolic. It's unclear really whether Cartel de los Soles actually exists as a hierarchical organized cartel as it's being described by the Trump administration. It's unclear to what extent Nicolas Maduro, he probably is very well aware of narcotics trafficking flying over Venezuelan airspace and leaving Venezuelan shores, but it's unclear whether this is truly an organized operational cartel with him sitting at the head. But that's very much what the Trump administration wants to portray. But again, UNODC, UN Office of Drugs and Crime, as well as independent investigators have really questioned the logic and evidence that the Trump administration is putting forward to make these claims.
So what is the Trump administration's beef then with Nicolas Maduro? I mean, if it's creating facts, if you will, about him and his narco-terrorism, as they call it, I mean, why is Trump so adamantly against Maduro?
It's a good question. I suspect there are two things here. Actually, three. Let me add a third first. First is the issues he made the issue of Venezuelan criminals entering the U.S. illegally as a campaign issue. He mentioned wrongly that Tren de Aragua, which is another criminal organization out of Venezuela, had taken over a town in Colorado. It was not true. But then he also argued that Nicolas Maduro was emptying his prisons and his psychiatric centers to flood the U.S. with criminals and I guess the criminally insane. And then he also claimed that this was done intentionally to try to subvert the United States. On the other hand, you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is a Cuban American, who has made really one of his primary goals since first Hugo Chavez in 1999 was sworn into office, and then later Nicolas Maduro, is trying to engage in regime change. The Venezuelan government under Nicolas Maduro and previously under Hugo Chavez worked closely with the former Castro regime in Cuba. So this was really very much for Marco Rubio, or still is, sort of his main enemy. So you've got on the one hand a domestic agenda, on the second hand Marco Rubio, who wants to engage in regime change, and then on the third hand, last time in office, Donald Trump tried to pursue a regime change policy by working with the National Assembly to create a fictional president, then president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, and name him as a legitimate president. That didn't work and completely failed, and that embarrassed Donald Trump. So quite frankly, much of what we can see across the board, domestically and internationally, what Donald Trump is doing is oftentimes trying to settle old scores from when he lost or didn't accomplish what he wanted in the first administration.
So Juan, I understand, is now living in exile in Miami, if I'm not mistaken. Is he still a candidate in the eyes of the Trump administration to replace, as a possible replacement for Maduro, or is he too tainted? Is there someone else that Trump and Marco Rubio could envision replacing Maduro?
So first of all, Juan Guaido, as you mentioned, is living in Miami. He had to leave. This was basically a 3-year experiment, but the National Assembly dissolved the Juan Guaido government at the end of 2022. And then he left to live in Florida. And Donald Trump, according to many credible reports, really resents Juan Guaido. He feels like he humiliated him. He even invited him to the State of the Union address in 2019 and cited him and called him the legitimate president of Venezuela, and he never delivered. So now what's happened, and this happened as a result of the Joe Biden administration's policies, is that there was a presidential election held last year. In the lead up to it, the opposition held open primaries that they organized themselves, and overwhelmingly they elected this woman, Maria Corina Machado, as the opposition leader. Maduro government prevented her from participating in the election, so she nominated or threw her weight behind a stand-in, but she's now seen as being the real challenger to the Maduro government, the real legitimate, because in 2024, July 28th, they held elections, and by all accounts, the elections were stolen. And so now, in favor of Maduro, so now Maria Corina Machado is seen as a legitimate president. She's not recognized as a legitimate president, nor is her stand-in Edmundo Gonzalez, because quite frankly, no one wants to go down that same road they went down with Juan Guaido. But she is really who Marco Rubio is talking to, and who a lot of the sort of weight behind the United States in terms of trying to find some alternative leader is being thrown behind.
Let me ask you before we run out of time, what kind of support can Maduro count on outside of Venezuela, particularly China? Can he expect China to intervene at all? I mean, can he expect Beijing to want to have a conflict with Washington over him?
So it's a good question. And first of all, when Maduro stole the election, by all accounts, the UN and the Carter Center claimed that and demonstrated that. China, Russia, Cuba, Iran, North Korea all recognize Maduro, kind of a rogues gallery, if you will. I don't think any of those countries are willing to sacrifice their relationship with the United States or put themselves at risk for Nicolas Maduro. Many of those countries realize this is a government that's deeply broke, deeply corrupt, and deeply unreliable. So no, they won't. They'll raise questions and concerns and protests, but they're not about to go to the mat for this government.
Christopher Sabatini from Chatham House. Mr. Sabatini, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.